After I've gone through all of the effort to plant a garden, my biggest fear is that when it comes time to harvest, I won't have enough time or the presence of mind to actually utilize everything I've grown, and all of that time and energy and effort will go to waste. I've been growing my own food while working a full-time job for almost 12 years now, and here are a few things that I've learned along the way about avoiding waste of any kind. As the weather starts to warm up, a lot of the early lettuces and kales and other salady things that we planted early in the season will start to get ready to bolt or go to seed. And we can delay that process by consistently picking just a part of that plant. So while we're used to buying a whole head of lettuce at a time at the grocery store, if we are growing our own lettuce, we can harvest it a few leaves at a time and therefore extend the amount that the plant will actually produce, but also extend the amount of time that we're able to harvest from that plant. If we harvest the plant about 1/3 at a time, we will not only just get a lot more from each plant that we planted, but we will also stave off that bolting process a lot later into the season. And that 1/3 at a time rule comes from thinking about the leaves of these plants being their solar panels. These are the things that collect the sun's energy and send it down into the roots of the plants. So if we take too much at once, it's going to stunt the plant's growth and make it so that it's not producing as much for us to pick, but it also stresses the plant, makes it feel like, oh, this might be the end of the season. I do need to make sure that I produce seeds before I die so that I can carry on the species. If we do notice some of our plants starting to create some flowers, which is the beginning of seed heads, we can stave that off a little bit longer by clipping them back behind the flowers, but ultimately, this is kind of a sign that the end is coming regardless. But when it comes to more tender vegetables and herbs like this cilantro, we can pick them and actually extend their lifespan in the fridge by quite a bit simply by putting them into a glass of water and then putting them in the fridge. Like this cilantro should last for 2 or 3 weeks beyond where the plant will continue producing. You can do this with tons of things that have really soft, easily bruisable leaves, but one of my favorite things to do this with is basil, because Lord knows fresh basil is like the best thing on earth. We get the absolute most out of our plants as far as nutritional density, nutritional availability when we pick them at the right time. But a lot of beginner gardeners really struggle knowing when it is actually the right time to pick anything. And we have a couple things at our disposal there. We can look at the back of our seed packets. Most seed packets have a days to harvest indication on the back, and that gives us a pretty good idea. But we have a couple other things at our disposal: color, texture, smell. Does it look like the thing that I've seen at the grocery store before? Some plants, though, just looking at them aren't super obvious when they're actually ripe or ready to pick, and watermelon is a classic example of this. But there are other indications we can look for. For example, the little curlicues on the stem of the watermelon. So if you look at your watermelon, you look at the stem and you locate the little curlicue closest to the watermelon. If it's green, the watermelon is not ripe and it's not ready to pick. If it's brown, then your watermelon's ready to go. Enjoy. If you really aren't sure if it's ready to pick or not, as hard as it may be, just pick it and taste it and decide whether it's ready or not. Be really gentle as you are picking, placing, and storing your garden harvest, because any kind of compression or bruising is going to cause it all to spoil faster. So as I'm picking these lettuces, I'm really careful to just pinch off the area that I want to use. If I'm really concerned, I'm going to use scissors or a sharp knife. And then even when I'm throwing them in the bucket, I'm going to be very gentle about how I do so. I'm also going to be really careful about not putting heavy stuff on top of really, really fragile stuff, and all of that will just help to extend the shelf life of all the things that I pick in the garden. As I'm harvesting, I always have 2 buckets, one for the house and one for the animals. And that way, as I'm walking through the garden, if I find any kind of pest damaged leaves, I can pick them and toss them in this bucket, which will help to preserve the rest of the plant, not having to put energy into healing damaged foliage. But I also have my house harvest, which I will very carefully pack with the heaviest stuff on the bottom and the lightest, most fragile stuff on top. And this way I'm able to mitigate pests in the garden, and everything that my animals don't eat goes into the compost pile, gets composted, and then turns into better soil for a better garden next year. Due to my very limited time constraints when it comes to being in the garden, I am a very lazy harvester, and that manifests in a few different ways. First, I don't wash my produce. And this is probably pretty controversial, but basically if something is too dirty to eat, like if I feel uncomfortable putting it directly in my mouth, I'm going to toss it immediately into the for the animals bucket. And beyond that, I'm also thinking about some business principles that I learned back when I was working in marketing. First in, first out. The first thing that I put in the fridge is also going to be the first thing that I take out. If I'm harvesting fresh things, they go in the back. They are very clearly labeled as to when I picked them. But these things, kales, cabbages, broccolis, anything in the brassica family is going to last a whole lot longer in the fridge than these strawberries, which have to be used or frozen or canned or preserved in some way pretty dang quickly. When it comes to properly storing and utilizing some of your longer term storage crops, like all this garlic that I'm sitting amongst currently, you want to think about how each different type of produce actually wants to be stored. Your onions don't want to be stored near your garlic, and your potatoes, incidentally, don't want to be stored too close to your onions. Some things, like tomatoes, don't want to be stored in the fridge. They want to be left out on the counter where they can naturally continue to ripen and increase their flavor profile. But before fridges became popular, lots of folks had these things called root cellars, which were underground structures that would keep things at a basically cool, constant temperature, but most importantly, were fairly dry and definitely not humid. The quickest way to spoil any of your garden produce is to keep them in hot, wet, or humid climates where they're just basically in optimal conditions to rot. Two things that make making the most of your garden harvest both really awesome and really frustrating are that some things are all ready all at once, like cabbage tends to all get ready all at once. The nice thing about that though is that cabbages store pretty well in the fridge, so I can wait for a batch processing day to actually use them after they've been picked. Strawberries, on the other hand, need to be used really, really quickly, but they also don't all get ripe at the exact same time. So dealing with that can be a bit of a challenge, but that's when we think about what we have to get where we need to go. And with that, I utilize a freezer as much as humanly possible. So if I've got things that actually do freeze well, I'm going to pick them and put them in the freezer a little bit at a time. So spinach, kale, strawberries, broccoli, things that I can actually freeze at the exact moment that I pick them in whatever quantity I pick them, and then cook later. That's what I'm going to do first, because I really like to think about my big garden projects in a batch mindset. If I had to make one tiny batch of strawberry jam every single day as I picked the bowl full of strawberries that I pick throughout the season as each different variety ripens, I would be wasting a phenomenal amount of time making jam. Or I could just take that bowl of strawberries, dump it in the freezer, and then make jam when I have enough strawberries collected to actually make that jam. And similarly, I want enough spinach, kale, etc. in the freezer for me to grab bags of stuff all year long and make my smoothies, make a quick stir fry or whatever else. One of the questions that I get asked from my audience the most is, how do I have time to do all the things that I do? I actually have a class on time management and productivity that is available on my website, annabelletrades.com. We'll talk more about that later. But when it comes to time management, whether I'm in the garden or doing literally anything else in life, proper planning, time blocking, and prioritization is the answer to all of those questions, no matter what I'm doing. So with that, there is lots in the garden that is ready to harvest, but not necessarily ready to consume at that exact moment. I mean, there is no way that I could eat all of this all at once. So I have to think about what options I have as far as long-term storage, preservation, dehydration, canning, pickling, fermenting, and all those things. And then I want to make an actual plan about how I'm going to go about doing those things. Like I was talking about with the strawberries, if I had to make one tiny jar of strawberry jam one at a time every day all summer long, that would be a phenomenal waste of my time. So I want to think about, okay, I'm going to have to make strawberry jam eventually. It takes a while for the jam to boil down, so I'm also going to be making a pot of chicken stock, utilizing the cutoffs from a whole bunch of vegetables that I've used throughout the season as I've been doing various kitchen projects. I'm also going to think about, okay, maybe this is a time to do some water bath canning. This is also a time to, cut the stems off a bunch of things, maybe blanch some vegetables and do other basic processing tasks of a whole bunch of stuff all at once. Maybe I'll make a big batch of sauerkraut with a whole bunch of cabbages all at once. But ultimately, I want all of that stuff to happen in a specific block of time, because Parkinson's law says that every task will take the amount of time that we give it, and I don't want to give any of these tasks too much time. I do meal prep on Sundays, and a really good way to introduce a little bit of zest or excitement into your meal prep routine, your dinner menu, is to think about how you can actually incorporate what's ripe in the garden this week or what's ready to pick in the garden this week and incorporate it into your meal prep. Considering the fact that I do this on Sundays, Saturdays are a great day for me to come into the garden and pick a bumper crop of whatever happens to be ready to go, and then to think ahead, plan a little bit about how I'm going to use those things throughout the week, and therefore not let things go to waste, make the most of what I've taken my time and effort and energy to grow, and also put a little spice back into our lives. Once you've got the basics down, like picking things when they're ready to be picked, tossing things that can be tossed into freezer bags, and then just gently storing your harvest in the fridge or in the proper boxes away from the other things that are going to cause it to spoil faster. Then there are some kind of master level kitchen techniques you can master. Things like blanching, which is a quick drop in hot water, which will help you to freeze things better. Pre-peeling or chopping things before you put them in the fridge or the freezer will also make them easier to use in the moment or on the fly as you're preparing meals throughout the week. Once you've got the basics of planting and picking things at the right time down, I understand how intimidating things like canning, pickling, fermenting, all of those kind of like second level things can seem. But the good news is I've made videos and have dozens of articles about all those things. So water bath canning, the simplest form of canning and the easiest way to do small batch things like one little batch of strawberry jam at a time, all on my Squarespace website. I have been documenting my journey from knowing nothing about any of this, being a total city slicker, to now living on this farm in Tennessee for the last 12 years on my Squarespace website, annofalltrades.com. There you can find my entire journey from planting my very first garden in my very first raised beds in our backyard in Seattle, Washington, to our journey towards our first farm, learning how to can, how to preserve, how to milk my first goat. You can find how-to videos, step-by-step tutorials, and recipes for basically any of this stuff on my blog, along with all kinds of other stuff too. Squarespace has been a fantastic resource for me, someone who is not super tech savvy, to be able to easily drag and drop everything that I want to share with the world into a beautiful artist design template that then, with a single click, shares it with the world for the last 12 years that I've been learning how to do all this stuff. So if you're interested in starting a website of your own, go to squarespace.com. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/annofalltrades and you'll get a 10% discount. If you're busy, but you want to have a garden like this without very much input, check out my 10 tips to be a better lazy gardener video right here. I will see you in that video. Cheers!